Hello, my name is Sensei Alex Kakuyo, and I'm a teacher in the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism. I'm also the author of the Buddhist blog, The Same Old Zen. Today I'll be answering questions that were sent in to me by members of our Sangha about Buddhism and how it can be used in daily life. If you'd like to ask me a question, you can do so by emailing me at sameoldzen@gmail.com or by commenting below. If you'd like to remain anonymous, please let me know, and in that case, I won't read your name or your question verbatim, but I will answer it in next week's video, which will be posted Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, let's get started. Our first question comes from Tommy Patrick Bradshaw, and he asks, I was looking for your thoughts on the keeping of precepts, in whatever number one counts them, whether the traditional 5 for householder, 8 monastic sets, etc., and our Western ideas of being legalistic and firm rather than forgiving when we slip on our observances. Do you feel Buddhists come from a Western perspective, fail to follow precepts in a skillful manner, being in the spirit of them, or are we generally too focused on things in a legalistic manner? Well, that's a very good question, Tommy. I'm not sure I'm comfortable talking about Western Buddhism as a whole and how we do or do not go about following the precepts, but I will give you some of my general ideas. The first being that we have to keep track of why the precepts exist. Now, the precepts were laid down by the Buddha in the Vinaya, or monastic rules, and they were meant to do 2 things. 1, keep the monastics both in mind and body healthy enough that they could practice Buddhism, but also to ensure that they were good image bearers for the Dharma, and thus they could maintain a good relationship with the community that supported them. So, for example, one good thing about the Vinaya is that it also lays out the story behind why certain rules were put in place. So the 5th precept, which says to refrain from abusing intoxicants, drugs or alcohol, that was put in place because a monk reached a very deep level of attainment or realization in his meditation. His friends threw him a party, he got drunk, and was found the next day face down in a ditch. Obviously, not very good look for Buddhism. Also, did not help the relationship the monks had with the community, who naturally weren't happy that their donations were being used to have drunken monks fall down in ditches. So the Buddha, in his wisdom, laid down the rule that stated monks were no longer allowed to drink alcohol, which makes sense. However, the question then becomes, well, what does that mean for lay people like ourselves? Now, I think the question we need to ask is, when we're deciding if something breaks the precepts or if it's in keeping with them, does this help me in my Buddhist practice? Does this cause harm to myself or others? And if the answer is no, this hurts my Buddhist practice, or yes, this does cause harm to myself or others, then that's something we shouldn't do. So in the case of the 5th precept, to refrain from abusing intoxicants, I personally choose to abstain from drugs and alcohol. So I don't smoke marijuana, I don't drink beer or wine, etc. Because frankly, I know a lot of people who've hurt themselves or others by doing those things. On the flip side, however, I do drink kombucha, which is fermented tea. So because it's fermented, it does have alcohol in it. And I had a very long conversation with myself about whether drinking kombucha, fermented tea, was in keeping with the 5th precept. And I did a lot of research. You can't get drunk drinking kombucha. But more importantly, I realized that if I was so legalistic about the 5th precept that I didn't allow myself to drink things like kombucha that isn't designed to get you drunk but does have alcohol in it, well, now I can't use mouthwash either, because mouthwash also has alcohol in it. So that was the decision I made for myself. Beer, wine, no. Kombucha, mouthwash, yes. And that's the type of conversation that we all need to have with ourselves in terms of the precepts. Not looking at it as rules that we can keep in a black or white manner, but rather as a conversation that we must continually have. Does this help my Buddhist practice? Does this cause harm to myself or others? Based on those 2 questions, we can decide if what we're doing is in keeping with the precepts. And also, we have to remember again that we should be forgiving both of ourselves and of others because, again, this is a conversation. Maybe we decide to keep the precepts in a different way. Maybe we make a mistake. And if we do make a mistake, the only thing left for us to do is to acknowledge that mistake, fix it if we can, and then work to do better in the future. No need to beat up ourselves or others based on the precepts, or really anything in Buddhist practice. So I hope that answers your question. Our next question comes from Stuart Dord. Thank you for the observations about Buddhanature. What would you think were the practical implications of us having/being this? And that's a very good question. So the idea of Buddhanature, just to bring everyone up to speed, really came about with the founding of Mahayana Buddhism as it's practiced in places like Korea, Japan, and China. And the idea is that we all have Buddha nature, and we are all, at our core, originally enlightened. This is the teaching of Hongaku, if you'd like to look it up. And because we're already enlightened and we all already have Buddha nature, there are a couple things that come from this. In my own practice, I found that it allows me to be a lot calmer because if I'm already enlightened, if I already have Buddha nature, then there's nothing for me to struggle for. Doesn't matter how much money I have. It doesn't matter how I dress. My value is inherent and it's unchanging because my Buddha nature is unchanging. So I go to my job, I work hard, but I don't work hard for fear that I will or will not be good enough. I just work hard because I want to be good at my job. I enjoy it and I like doing it. And similarly, this allows me to be a lot more forgiving of other people. Because if I have Buddha nature and my value is inherent, that means they also have Buddha nature and their value is also inherent. So even if they're doing something I don't like per se, that doesn't change the fact that they are a Buddha, just like I am. And like all Buddhas, they're here to teach me a lesson, either by their example, they're doing something good, or by their example, they're doing something not so good. So I would say that's the practical application of Buddha nature and original enlightenment is it allows us to be a lot more compassionate and a lot more forgiving both of ourselves and others because it creates a baseline of goodness that we can go into every situation with. And it reminds us that no matter what we do or don't do, our value is unchanging. Going back to Tommy's question about the precepts. If you keep the precepts, you're a Buddha. If you break the precepts, you're also a Buddha. You're just a Buddha in training, so to speak. So I think that's the practical application of the teaching. And our next question was anonymous, but the general idea was, how do we cope with jealousy? And this is a very good question because it's, again, something that we all experience. We've all been jealous or envious at some point in our lives. And the key thing about jealousy is first we have to ask ourselves, where does jealousy come from? And it comes from desire, which Buddhism teaches is the root of all suffering. We desire something that other people have. So maybe they get a promotion and we don't necessarily dislike them, but we want a promotion too, so we're jealous. And this can be dangerous because out of that desire comes a lot of other suffering. Anger can come from that. Sadness or depression can come from it, and it could hurt our relationship with the other person or ourselves. So realizing that our jealousy is rooted in desire, the next question becomes, well, what do we do about it? Well, there's a very good teaching in Tibetan Buddhism called opposing forces. So basically, if we're feeling an unhealthy thought or emotion, we use the opposing force to get rid of it. So if we're angry at someone, we give them a gift, which is the exact opposite thing you would think to do if you're angry at another person. But if we give a gift to people we're angry at, or if we give them a compliment, that naturally disengages us from our anger and helps us build a better relationship with the person we're angry at. So it's multifaceted in that way. So the opposing force to jealousy is sympathetic kindness, or sympathetic joy rather, which is also one of the awakened mind states or sublime abodes of Buddhism, That is to say, it's a mind state that Buddha wants us to cultivate within ourselves. So when we feel jealousy, one thing that I've found is it's very helpful to just be very, very enthusiastic in our appreciation for the other person. So we tell them congratulations, maybe we get them a card. We reflect on how good this thing is for them and their family instead of reflecting on, wow, I wish I'd gotten that too. What happens is if we train ourselves to be happy at other people's accomplishments, then we get to share in their happiness. That's the sympathetic joy. And because good things are always happening to people around us generally, the more we practice sympathetic joy for other people, the more joy we experience ourselves in our own lives. It's a very healthy cycle that develops. So sympathetic joy and the practice of it would be the first step to deal with jealousy. The other would be contentment. And that's simply just reminding ourselves of the good things we have. Oftentimes, when we're trapped in the mind of desire, we have a mindset of scarcity and we feel like we don't have enough. But if we learn to practice contentment and remind ourselves of the things we do have, then that jealousy and that desire goes away. So we may just do a very simple meditation and start listing out all the things we have. I have money in my bank account to buy food. I have a refrigerator with food in it. I have friends and family who care about me. I have a clean, safe apartment, etc., etc., etc. And as we continue to do this throughout the day, what happens is we worry less about what other people have and being jealous about that. And instead, we appreciate the things that we have and we feel joy and contentment because we have those things. So that's what I would recommend in dealing with jealousy is one, sympathetic joy, congratulating the other person and reflecting on how good whatever they have is for them, and also contentment and meditating on the many gifts that we have in our own personal life. So that's our last question for this week. I hope this was helpful for you guys. And I also wanted to say that this is very helpful for me as well. So I really appreciate your questions. Reverend Koyo Kubose, my teacher, often says that the best way to learn is to teach. And thinking about your questions and reflecting on them has been really great for me in my own personal practice. So thank you for that. And if you'd like to ask me a question for next week's video, which will be posted Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, again, either post in the comments below with your question or email me at sameoldzen@gmail.com. If you'd like to remain anonymous, let me know, and of course I won't mention your name in the video. And if you'd like to make sure you always get these videos when they're posted, please remember to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're watching this on Facebook, join our Facebook group. The Same Old Zen Facebook group is what it's called. I know it's not original, but it's the best I could come up with. So thank you again for your time, and Amitabha. Until next time.